Hey everyone, Reach Legal here. So if you haven't seen on my Instagram, I'm collaborating with Vizcom to show you how you can use this new AI-powered tool to speed up your sketching process. So as you can see here, I'm doing one of two versions of how you can actually use this software. This one is called Free Draw, where you actually take your brush tool and you actually just block out shapes. So I like this a lot when I'm trying to figure out what I really want, but don't have a huge idea. That is kind of the point of this software, in my opinion, at this point in the process, or at least the stage where it's at, where if you need to figure things out in the beginning and get a bunch of ideas quickly that you don't have to physically draw yourself, this is a fun way to do it. So here, what I'm basically doing is I'm drawing all of these shapes and blocks that gives the AI some type of foundation to build on top of, which will then use prompting to fill in the gaps. So here you can obviously see that I'm designing an espresso machine. Now this espresso machine is supposed to have a base, a midsection, maybe a water tank, and some type of top. And then a, hopper on top of it, kind of Starbucks inspired, like the ones you see at the counters when you go into the store. And what this is doing is basically giving some type of area for our prompt to build on. So here, I'm going to put our prompt. So I'm putting in a steel espresso machine, KitchenAid concept design, keyshot render. So from this, you can see I've generated a whole bunch of concepts. Now, each of these concepts come up instantly. You can see 4 at a time in this new version of the software, which will be out ASAP and all of you can try. And what I'm able to do here is see a ton of ideas that go beyond what I would have originally thought. Obviously, some are funky, some are kind of cool, some are in between. But no matter what, they're giving you unique ideas, which you would not find online. So once I find one that I like, let's say it's this silver one, I can now go in and start changing all the details and have it go through the render engine again. You can also see on the left in my layers panel, whenever I click confirm, it takes the ones I like, puts it in my layers, and I can keep it for later. So I can go back, hide something, I can take my original sketch, do it again. I can basically keep going back and forth to have a non-linear process in order to get what I'm looking for. But here, I'm going in and adding some more details so I can start rendering this again. So you can see here, I'm changing this hopper a little bit, adding a lid, I'm changing the overall profile, and now I'm using a color that's similar to the body color to draw on top of details I don't want. That way, those pieces are now removed when I go back to generate. And I can also go and add things that I didn't have before, like this espresso part on the bottom that actually we put the beans into. So once I get this, you can start rendering. And you can see here I'm changing the drawing influence. So when you're in the free draw mode or in this new software version render mode, it's better to have a lower influence. So when you have a low influence, it basically means that general shape is going to be interpreted by the software how it sees fit. The more you go to 100%, the more it's going to one-for-one copy whatever it is that you drew. So when you're doing a line work drawing, it's much better to have a higher influence. That would be if you imported a line drawing sketch of your own or if you drew something into the software by itself. So when you're doing the two, there's no changing the influence is going to basically say, give me something new or refine what I actually have put in front of it. So here, once I've picked something that I like, I can start refining it even further. So what I'm going to do is go back to our brush and start adding in the details. So here I want to really define this water tank, give a few more lines, which is going to help the AI understand where things start and stop to give a little more crisp edges. And I can also go in and start to actually change full-on details. So here I like that it gave this kind of stepped handle that feels like something screwed onto a post. So I'm going to go and take a light gray color to match the ground. So it basically says to the AI, this no longer exists, and draw on top of it. Now, also, like I said before, to give some more definition, I like blending a little bit of line work with my actual free draw brush strokes. So that's why I put some of the lines in that you can see up top, that now defines that that white area actually is split. So pulling all this stuff together starts to allow me to on the fly make decisions. Like here, I got a little bit of a wonky, I don't know what it's called, spout. So I'm gonna go and cover that up and get rid of it. And what this allows me to do is really go in and start to figure out what parts it generated that I like and which parts I want to make sure are kept in the design. And one, for example, is it doesn't seem realistic to have this hopper on top not impede itself into that domed surface because that says it's off to the side. That's one thing you have to know about this type of software, is that you need to know the base levels of sketching and perspective in order to get it to do what you want. If you don't know how to draw in perspective, it's not going to fix that. You need to put it in perspective properly, and then it can fill in the gaps. This is a software that fills in gaps. It is not one that does it for you. It's able to generate things, but you also need to be able to take that as the designer and run with it. So here, I'm running with it. I'm taking my updates and generating and generating and generating at about a 70 to 80% drawing influence, and starting to figure out how I can take this design and take it from something a little more mushy and turn it into something a little more solid. So if I didn't say it before, when you're doing these types of drawings, actually having your drawing influence set to the right percentage is super important. In line drawings, I think it's good to have as high as possible. So maybe about 80% is what I found works. And for free draw or shape blocking, more about 50, 60%. But once this drawing is done, you can actually go and add whatever you want. Here, I'm trying to tell it that I want a dial, so I can just draw them in myself, or I can actually have it generated and see what it comes up with. Because one thing I like about this is that it's a middle ground between a hand-drawn object and a render. I don't love putting renders in front of my clients right away because it tells them that the idea is finished. Here, if we have line work on top of a fuzzy sketch, it allows us to be able to say it's not finished, let's work on it together. So with that in mind, let's try another concept. So we're going to start this one the exact same way as the last by using the free draw tool or a big brush. So here we're going to go with a fully different type of espresso machine. We're going to do a manual espresso machine. So for this one, I've never even used one of these in person, but I feel like it's something that I would have seen in like a turn of the century bodega Italian spot in New York City. So I'm going to take that and run with it. So for this one, we're going to do a half cylinder or half pill. We're going to put a slot down the center with a post and a big handle, and we're going to basically give it general proportions. But we're making sure we're basically using the rules of perspective, because like we said, the software is not going to fix your perspective. It's just going to be able to draw on top of what you put in here. So on the bottom, we're going to have maybe this little espresso window that shows all the, ground beans that you have inside of it on top of this spout. And one thing I want to try in this one's a little bit different is I want to put this line work in the beginning of my sketch. So that way I'm giving it a little bit more definition on top of my actual color blocking. So that way I can try doing a different flow, which we'll talk about in a second, to get us to the desired result. But that's also the funny thing is when you're using this type of software, the desired result is basically lots of results. I want to be able to see a bunch of different things that I would not have thought about on my own. So that way, when I go into actually jumping into CAD or something, I have a whole bunch more in my repository to work with, opposed to just a singular or a handful of ideas that I thought up on my own or my team come up with. So here we can see we're trying to take our design and change it up a little bit. We're going to have these kind of juicy salif style legs that lift it off the ground. And then we're also going to take the arrow tool on the top, which is the white arrow, and move our object. So here we can see we can do two different styles. The image that rendered with a background, that was the render. But we do refine and iterate, we actually get it where it just tightens up our sketch and it doesn't give us a background. So for me, I prefer actually leaving the background out because it gives me more flexibility. If you do the render option, it's only going to give you images with random backgrounds. So unless you want to have your object set into a space you can't define, or you just don't care about it at this point, maybe you want to try it this way. And what I like about this is it actually takes your original color blocking line weight and cleans it up a bit. And then once it cleans it up, then you can go into render and try it again later. So it slowly tightens your sketch as you go, which is a very similar way to how I like to draw all my marker renderings. Starting loose, getting tighter, and refining as I go. Because even in that type of very strict drawing style, I don't have my full design figured out. I am doing it as I go. This is just a much more rapid way to do that. So you can see here, I'm starting to figure things out as I go. I'm going to manipulate this cylinder on top, which is a bit different than my original design, but that's the whole purpose, right? To figure things out as I'm designing it. So I'm going to use similar colors to the background color to basically mask portions I don't want or add portions that I do want. So that's why I put the medium tone gray on the cylinder on the top to get rid of that part, and then the lighter gray below it to remove that nozzle, which wasn't super working well, and the black to thicken up the legs. So now once I click generate, I have 4 new concepts I can start working with. So we can see that all of these kind of feel almost like Dali drawings. They're a little melty, they're a little imperfect, but that's kind of nice. It means the drawing is not finished, and it gives us the ability to come in and tighten it up. Because I believe with this new AI software that's becoming very prevalent very quickly, we are going to have to be much more of the style and taste curators, more than just people who can do that, but execute ideas. So here, if you can find the sweet spot between those, you can seriously speed yourself up and get to a process which is going to be much more efficient, which makes your work-life balance better and means you actually pound for pound make more money per project you work on, especially for someone like myself who runs their own studio. You have to keep things like that in mind. So here you can see I'm taking this new version and starting to change it up a bit more and starting to add in the parts that I want. So before we saw the little nozzles weren't working very well. So I'm going to try and be more specific and see what it can do and if we can get one that we really like. So now that we've generated these new concepts, we're seeing that we actually got some very different things here. So this kind of feels almost like a DeLonghi style spout for an espresso machine, or something that looks more like a mechanized product, which is kind of cool, having this very tactile handle paired with this very electronics style, at least in my opinion, spout for the actual espresso to come out of. So once we get into this portion, I can start to actually take that inspiration and start pulling it into my design, which we'll see in a minute. But for now, I always love to just quickly check out render and or refine/iterate just to see with different drawing influences what starts coming up. Because it's the same thing as if I had gone and typed in espresso machine on, I don't know, Unsplash or something with really good imagery. I'm finding things to inspire me. I'm just doing it now in my sketching software, which is part of the beauty of this new way to work. So here, once again, I'm going in, adding some line weight, tightening things up. I'm getting to a design that I'm starting to like, and I want to make sure that I can use it to keep generating new ideas that are closer and closer to my new intent. And since I saw that cool DeLonghi style nozzle, I want to put that in myself. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to color block it out and just add a little bit of detail, like these little nozzles, and then some type of highlight and or shadow. So that's going to help tell the AI what exactly it is that I want. And even if it doesn't give it exactly what it thinks, I can push it in the direction I want it to go. So now when I click render, I can start seeing how this thing starts to feel more real, how it's giving those kind of swoopiness to the actual highlights in the bottom, but it's not right there yet. So I'm going to go and add a little bit more line weight around it before I click generate again to start tightening that detail up and get it to a place in which I really feel like I can understand what's going on. And one thing I really like about this is that it does feel like a hybrid of regular, like traditional sketching with this new fast, rapid element. I am someone who I call myself recovering perfectionist. So this is a way for me to get around that. It's not perfect. It's a way for me to just try things rapidly and not get too focused on one idea. I try and teach my students at Parsons all the time, you can't get too fixated on one thing. You have to keep pushing and pushing until you run out of time or your creative director says, no, you've got it. Now move forward. So we finished that second concept, a little bit different, but now let's try one more where we try even a little bit different of a process with this software. So for here, I'm going to do shape blocking again. I like doing this process. We can easily do it with line work, but I'm going to keep going with this because I like my line drawing style on my own. This is a new way for me to work. So I'm thinking about my light source. We have it coming from the front, so it means that's the highlight, the top is the mid-tone, and the side is the dark tone. And now we're going to start thinking about where we actually put the cup. So we have a cubic design. Let's put together a cubic plinth to put our actual espresso cup on top of. So we're going to do that in a different color. And I don't love it, so I'm going to change it up again, different proportion, and I'm going to go here and start figuring out where the espresso comes out of. So keeping with that boxy theme, I'm going to add a new general object above it, but you can see here, I'm still more or less keeping with perspective. I'm keeping all of my vanishing points going to the same or appropriate vanishing point itself. That way we know when it renders it, it's going to come out looking accurate. And the design itself is feeling a little bit too hard, and I love, like I said a minute ago, those kind of bold espresso Starbucks style hoppers on top. So let's put one here as well. And also give ourselves either a shadow or a foot. I'm not sure. We'll let the AI decide. But I also want to define what this is going to be. So putting a little bit of brown on the top says this is full of something brown, hopefully. And that's what I want to see what it'll actually come up with and give us. So once again, we're going in here and cleaning up our sketch with a little bit of line work. I find, you'll see in a second, how we can take this really rapid loose sketching. I'm someone who, for better or for worse, loves the drag and drop line tool in Sketchbook Pro. This is a way to get around it. So when we're prompting, we're going to do Breville Home Espresso Machine Steel Keyshot Render. Something else to consider when you're doing your prompting is it goes in order of preference. So the first thing is going to be the most important and so on and so forth as you go down, breaking things up by commas. But since we've tried our basic color block sketch with line work in the refined iterate sketch render version, you can see now it basically took my sketch and tightened it up. The line work is cleaner, it's singular lines opposed to lots of fuzzy lines, and we actually have those outer profiles a lot more clean and crisp than it was before. So I found this by accident, and I haven't really seen people doing it online, but I like how I can take this, really quickly roughen a sketch, and then just click that once to tighten the sketch up, and then take it into the actual render setting. That way I get closer to my intent in the beginning and kind of tighten in the rails of where the AI can go, with also the ability to change the drawing influence. That way I can really push it to what I want, or I can pull it back to something that I think would be really cool and new. But with this, we still need more detail. We lost some of it when we actually rendered it. So we're gonna go in and cover some things. We're gonna add some lines back into it and start to make this into an object, which can really be defined well when we click on it and render it. So I'm gonna hide extraneous details, and I'm gonna go ahead and just punch some of the details that I think really need to be brought through. So for this one, it's a pretty hard line on that corner. So I'm going to eventually go and fix that. But for right now, I'm just going to focus on that line work and then start rendering some options. So we can see we got 4 options, nice and tight, or relatively tight for how fast this was, and we're starting to get some cool details. Now it's saying, okay, we have this pill-shaped front of the nozzle, why not make the top round? Then it gave a slight puff to the part of the product where the actual espresso machine sits. So it's starting to give that rounded feel a little bit more life in a few more places, which is cool. I might have never gotten to this if I had not thrown it in here. And would I have ever taken the time to draw it? I don't know, because it takes a long time to do that. If you're trying to work quickly, that's not the way you want to go. But something else I want to talk about is how you can actually add textures and things. So here I'm thinking through what's the whole pattern for this like drip tray. One thing I did find is patterns are a bit tricky in AI right now. So if you're going to put one in, make it simple, like a dot or a line or two, because if you put a bunch, it gets a little fuzzy looking and kind of loses its intent. So try it, but just know it might be easier for you to draw in after the fact. Like, see how they're getting a little funky right here, but they're kind of close. And now you can see I've gone and added in those highlights just to make this feel a little bit more shiny. But one more thing I want to talk about is the arrow tool on top. So you can actually go and select your drawings once they're finished in your layers window, and you can change the proportion. So before it was too boxy, didn't feel like a home product, so I wanted to squeeze it down a bit. So before I clicked the render tab, I actually went and made sure that I changed the proportions. And now we can just click render, render, render for the whole day and to keep seeing new concepts. So it's still a little bit funky, so I think we need to change the actual drawing influence, but this one is kind of cool. It gave this front foot idea. It actually took the plinth and turned it into a cup, which I did not think about before. And then it took that kind of squared off front nozzle and turned it into this cylinder inside of a kind of, I don't know, hot dog bun shape. Looks like a bike pump I used to have, which snapped onto the frame of my bike. And what's cool about this is it's a place I did not think to go. But I want to make sure some of my original details are brought back in that have been forgotten, like having the beans in the top. And also I want to clean up their design. That way I don't have to go exactly where it's going, but I can kind of take inspiration and start pulling it together. So I like now that it feels almost like a full pill with a top to it that's inside of this little handle. It almost feels like the engines on a pod racer in Star Wars, something like that. So with this, we're starting to get a whole new feel. It was super boxy in the beginning. Now it's boxy light. It still has soft corners. It's got these rounded details. It's very shiny. It feels almost like a new age Breville or DeLonghi espresso machine, which is kind of cool. And that's obviously because we put Breville first in our prompt. But with this, you can see it's starting to get tight. It's starting to get pretty nice. If you know my sketching style, I love when things are nice and tight and crisp. And with AI right now, it's a bit tricky to get that to come across, but I think you can get it to an acceptable place. I would also say these sketches are perfect when you need to actually up the fidelity, to take them, throw them in Sketchbook Pro or Photoshop, and just blur it a hair and put some line work on top of it if you really need it. It's a way for you to get something that looks like you built all the CAD and rendered it in a few minutes, opposed to a few hours or even days, depending on the complexity of the object itself. But something else I want to talk about is making sure you understand what to draw. Think through the fact that AI is able to pull through a database of images that exist. So things that are completely new and not something that exists can be a bit challenging, so make sure you are picking shapes that are understandable. Seeing through things can be a bit hard for it to understand from my experience. And also make sure that you are prompting in a way that you're putting the most important thing first and foremost, keeping it simple and not overwhelming it. But as you can see here in our layers tab, it's just like Photoshop. We can take all of our layers that we have confirmed as renderings, keep them there so we can always go back and retrace our steps until we get to the final design. But with this one, we're almost done with our actual sketch. I'm trying to put a little bit more detail in here just to make it really pop with the highlights and shadows. Make sure this reads as the frothed milk. Trying to give it a little fuzzy texture. We'll see. It didn't work exactly how I wanted. I have learned if you're doing the color blocking tool, make sure you use a thicker color block. But this was really fun. I hope you all enjoyed seeing this. This is my first time using the software, and I really feel like within, 45 minutes or so, I was able to create 3 pretty good concepts, which would have taken probably 45 minutes a piece before. And now with this, I have general ideas, which I can share with my team. I can give each person one to own, or I can go build in CAD myself. So this is a great way to really up your speed and try a new thing. So check out Vizcom and let me know what you think. Thanks, everybody.